Naomi Klein, no logo, taking aim at the brand Bullies. Dive into the world of big-name brands in this summary of Naomi Klein's eye-opening book, No Logo, Taking Aim at the Brand Bullies. We explore the enormous power brands hold in today's society and their continuous battle for our economic and cultural attention, gain insights into the tactics brands use to infiltrate every aspect of our lives, their aggressive expansion strategies and attempts to control the market, and the consequences laborers in developing countries face due to outsourcing. Moreover, the summary reveals how some brands' growth has made them the main target for activists and how these companies are subverted and criticized.
The power of brands. Brands permeate every aspect of society and must constantly adapt to survive. Their success depends on their image and connection to consumers, rather than the quality of their products. Brands are inescapable in modern society. Advertisements, sponsorships, and logos are pervasive, and a brand's continued success depends on staying relevant and connected to consumers. In order to thrive, brands must embrace new trends and demographics, or risk becoming outdated and losing sales. One advertising executive compared consumers to roaches, saying that they become immune to advertising over time. This highlights the need for brands to continuously renew their connections with consumers in every sphere of life, from sponsoring sports equipment to funding research grants. In some cases, brands even get involved in school curriculums. The success of a brand hinges on its public perception and coolness factor rather than the quality of their products. Levi Strauss, a once cool brand, suffered a decline in sales due to a failure to update their image and marketing strategy. Overall, brands must constantly grow and adapt to survive in an ever-changing market where competition is fierce and consumers have short attention spans. They hold a powerful yet precarious position in society, as their popularity and success can be fleeting. The re-emergence of brands. In the 1980s, the concept of branded products being replaced by cheaper alternatives was widely accepted. However, today, brands have become more powerful and prestigious than ever. The shift to concept-driven brands that appeal to people on an emotional and spiritual level has been key to the success of modern branding. In contrast to older advertising approaches focused on the product, modern branding focuses on pouring resources into marketing, research, and cultivating the brand image. The success of a brand is now determined by the coolness of its name and logo, as well as the values it supposedly stands for. The Nike brand has been successful in repositioning itself as an organization that empowers women and people of color, which differs from just selling shoes. This passage showcases how brand success depends on brand identity rather than the actual product itself. The aggressive tactics of successful brands. Major brands like Walmart, Starbucks, and high-end labels like Diesel and Tommy Hilfiger use aggressive tactics to expand their market share and crush competition. Walmart relies on price and size to build huge stores on cheap land and force suppliers to lower their prices. Starbucks uses clustering, swamping an area with clusters of its stores to saturate the market. Meanwhile, Diesel and Tommy Hilfiger use the branded superstore strategy, building flagship stores in prime locations to create a celebrity exposure effect and entrench the brand in the consumer's mind. These brands all depend heavily on economies of scale but differ in their approaches to expansion, depending on their particular market. The book highlights the success of these brands, attributing it to their aggressive business models that allow them to capture huge swathes of the market and ruthlessly eradicate rivals. Dark side of the Nike model. Exploitation of workers in export processing zones. Multinational companies have been outsourcing their manufacturing to developing countries, adopting a practice known as the Nike model. To save on labor costs, they have closed their factories in Western countries and moved production to areas with cheaper labor. Export processing zones, located in less developed countries, have been designated tax-free zones to encourage investment. However, governments often remove minimum wages, labor laws and union rights to make the zones desirable to investors. Employees in these zones, mostly young migrant women, are neither protected by standard domestic law nor the responsibility of the corporations whose factories they work in. As a result, they must endure harsh working conditions, accept lower wages, and prove they are not pregnant. Women in Mexico, for instance, are asked to prove that they are menstruating to avoid being sacked, and the wages paid are often meager, as low as 13 cents an hour. Export processing zones were initially thought to aid the less developed nations, but in reality, they only facilitate the exploitation of workers. This practice has devastating consequences for workers in developing countries. The impact of outsourcing. The rise of outsourcing in the 1980s led to the decline of traditional manufacturing jobs and the emergence of poorly paid, non-contracted service jobs. As companies prioritized branding and advertising, they turned to overseas contractors to manufacture their goods, resulting in the closure of domestic factories and the loss of loyal, well-paid employees. Union membership was discouraged, and young, cheaper workers were preferred, with many hired through temp agencies to avoid offering employer benefits. This shift has resulted in a deeply cynical workforce without loyalty toward employers and who expect nothing in return. The impact of outsourcing has been detrimental to employees in the Western world, with McJobs becoming the norm. The dangers of synergistic dominance. In the book, the author highlights how corporations often engage in synergy, which involves merging with other brands to push their products into different markets, hence limiting consumer choices. Corporate censorship is also identified as one of the strategies firms use in protecting their brand images. Walmart, for example, refuses to stock music and magazines that may upset its family audience. Additionally, through the acquisition of Paramount Pictures and Blockbuster Video, Viacom has amassed immense power, controlling the films that play in cinemas and are displayed in video stores while limiting the exposure of other producers' films, thus creating a near-monopoly status. As such, the dominance of certain brands due to their aggressive expansion policies and pursuit of synergy poses a significant threat to consumers' freedom of choice. The power of brands. Brands have grown in influence and are increasingly at the center of activist campaigns due to their power and profits. Multinational corporations have become major political entities, influencing and even controlling governments without being constrained by legal and electoral frameworks. Activists campaign to hold corporations accountable for their actions. With brands becoming a prominent part of everyday life, emotional attachments are formed, making people more likely to speak out against malpractice. The dominance of brands in our cultural, political, and economic lives has led to them overtaking governments as the main focus for criticism. As a result, brands have inadvertently made themselves primary targets for activists. The power and vulnerability of brands. Brands exert influential cultural power in society, but their omnipresence can be used against them. Activist campaigns can tie themselves to a well-known brand to diminish its image and fame. The continuous and intense exposure to brand logos, images, and slogans has turned them into an inherent part of our consciousness. Nike's "Just Do It" and McDonald's golden arches are immediately recognizable globally. Nevertheless, corporations can become vulnerable due to their popularity, giving critics and activists tools to bring them down. Culture jamming is a practice in which activists manipulate brands' own images to communicate a different message. Finally, activists leverage brands and multinationals' negative practices like the use of sweatshops or environmental irresponsibility to frame their campaigns. For instance, consumers can boycott a brand to push for better practices or support companies with ethical policies. By targeting a specific brand, activists can threaten a multinational's cultural power and critique its actions, effectively diminishing its reputation and power.
The book's summary of A No Logo shows the intense power and influence of brands in the modern world, from conquering our consciousness to creating brutal working conditions in developing countries. Brands use ruthless business models to maintain their success at the cost of consumer choices and worker rights. As they expand their influence, brands become prime targets for activism due to their direct impact on global concerns. By subverting a brand's identity and power, critics can weaken their image and expose their unethical practices, ultimately making corporate giants accountable for their actions.